Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Scott Dawson. I'm the Dean here at CU Denver in the Business School. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 6th Business Insight series this year, each of which has been a pairing of a faculty member with folks from industry on a cutting edge topic. And we have a wonderful panel and important topic today about the new frontiers in artificial intelligence, which is being sponsored by Transamerica. Thank you to them. And just as we get started, I acknowledge it's a beautiful day here in Denver and our campus. I realize people could be virtual and be from outside of the Denver region, but our campus is just at the edge of a very historic place where the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute would meet. And I just want to pay respect to the lands that we inhabit here. So moderating our panel today, and I just wanted to also remind you that this is being recorded, and that if you have questions through the duration of the panelists here in the front part, we have some prepared questions that they're going to address. But if you have questions, please enter that in the Q&A rather than the chat, and Ryan will get to those towards the end of the webinar. So Ryan Lichtenwalter received his degree in computer science in 2006, after which he worked briefly in the defense industry in a wide variety of technical capacities. Missing academia, he returned to pursue his PhD in computer science with an emphasis in machine learning and network science. In 2019, Ryan moved to Denver to work with the data and analytics team at Transamerica. After a year working as an individual contributor, Ryan was promoted to head the data science team, where he interfaces between data science, data engineering, data governance, and the various business divisions to identify and promote effective data science project work. Ryan, thanks for moderating today. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Scott. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion. Let's have each of the panelists introduce themselves. Anthony, let's start with you.
I'm Anthony Bach. I'm head of AI implementation for Palantir Technologies. I work with our customers across both commercial and government to implement AI systems.
Thank you, Anthony. And Emilio.
Hi, my name is Emilio Lapiello. I'm a partner with the Boston Consulting Group, and I'm based in Boston. I belong to a team within BCG that is called Gamma, and we specialize in AI and data science solutions for our clients. I mostly work on projects related to the consumer industry, CPG, and retail.
Thank you, Emilio. And finally, Tony.
I teach artificial intelligence for business here at the business school, and also decision analysis and business analytics. So I have an interest in AI from the standpoint of explaining how can it be useful. I also worked in industry for many years, first as a research scientist in artificial intelligence, later as chief science officer for a healthcare machine learning company. So I've spent a long time looking for better tools to support decision and risk analysis. That's my real passion in the classroom or out of it. I'm thrilled to be here this morning. I think it's a timely time to be looking at what AI can do for us now that didn't used to be possible.
All right, Tony. Well, thank you all for joining us for this discussion. Let's go ahead and get started. And on the note that Tony just left us off on, the first question will sort of be what's new. So first question will be directed at Tony. AI and ML have been rigorous fields of research for more than 50 years, and they've been an active and growing part of business for over 10 years. What has changed in AI and ML in 22 since its meteoric rise a decade ago and before?
Yeah. I think there are several technology breakthroughs, some of which you may have heard about or read about in the press. And underneath those are some philosophical changes that make AI more useful. So one is, I think I've seen over the last 10 years, a reorientation from prediction that being able to predict some columns of numbers from others is now I think a completely understood problem. It's a commodity. Companies like DataRobot provide excellent off-the-shelf solutions to that. But I think I've seen a pivot from prediction to decision making, and decision making requires much more than just prediction. It's a harder problem. And the rise of reinforcement learning and autonomous vehicles and other autonomous AI systems has led to a very real-world engagement between AI algorithms and the need to make decisions and manage risks in uncertain environments. So I think gradually a problem that's pretty well understood, how do we predict some things from others, is giving way to what do we do about it? And that's an exciting development. Secondly, I'd say a lot of machine learning and AI used to be just pattern recognition. The basic idea was, let's look into the data, see if we can find stable patterns, and then use them to predict what's going to happen next. And that's great, but it's great when there are stable patterns, when you can study them long enough to find them using clever algorithms. It's not so hot when we have things like COVID that are really disruptive and that change the patterns that we might have found before. So I've seen and actually tried to champion and advance the rise of causal artificial intelligence, which says, where do those patterns come from? Those patterns are generated by underlying causal networks. How does the world work? And then can we use how the world works to predict what new patterns there will be, even if we don't have a lot of training data? We just have causal understanding. I think that's been huge. The third technology trend is the technical name for it is automated feature engineering. Instead of having lots of people spending person years trying to tweak features to find the most formative ones, a lot of that art and science is now automated, thanks in part to the rise of deep learning and multi-layer neural networks, which have the advantage of automatically identifying and abstracting features. And this leads to generalization from experience. Something that I've thought for years is, when you or I have a traumatic experience, for example, being chased by a dog, we don't need to have 10,000 or 100,000 or 1 million such experiences to figure out what to do. We get it the first time. We have minimal training needs. Getting machines to do that, getting them to recognize what are the causally relevant patterns here, something with sharp teeth is chasing you. It doesn't matter whether it's a dog or a bear or something else. So abstraction and learning really quickly from just one example, that's something that's becoming increasingly possible, that I think is revolutionizing AI. And finally, we've seen a couple of attempts to get world knowledge at scale. Things like Watson, or there's a breakthrough in natural language that can write very plausible articles and essays, the so-called talk to transformer. Getting world knowledge at scale into AI has been a grand challenge since the dawn of the field, and I think there's been breakthroughs in just the last couple of years in doing that. So in the press, we've read about things, heard about things like maybe AlphaGo from DeepMind. Now puzzle solving and decision optimization engines can do things that really weren't possible 10 years ago or 20 years ago. When that technical capability is married up with an understanding of the big wide world and how causal patterns work, I think we are seeing a change in AI that makes it a whole lot smarter and a whole lot more practical. So those are some of the innovations that to me are really exciting, and they kind of reinforce each other. So that's all the technical side. I'll stop with that, and I think we're going to open up the business side as we go.
Thank you. That was very enlightening and also convincing. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Anthony, please.
Yeah, so I think it's worth taking kind of the opposite side of that question, which is that rather than asking what is new, I want to say, like, what is the same, right? So if we go back to 2011, which is kind of a year before these big breakthroughs in neural network architectures that kind of got everyone excited about AI. Mark Andreessen, who's a venture capitalist, wrote an essay where he said software was eating the world, right? And so like, what does that mean, right? Like, what was he talking about? He was talking about basically digital native businesses changing the economics of how business is done, whether it's like direct to consumer, loans, it changing finance, or Amazon automating supply chains and package delivery in a way at a scale, using software that was revolutionizing those industries. And that process of software eating the world is really sort of what we're talking about when we're talking about AI. Just to like, and the reason we're talking about it is because AI is essentially enabling new ways for software to continue to eat the world, right? And that's like the thing that legacy businesses are concerned about is how do they compete, right? How do you make sure that you become a software company so that you don't get eaten by some Silicon Valley startup, right? And so if we think of traditional software as being explicit codification of business processes and rules and decision making, AI is a toolbox that introduces a new capability, which is essentially implicit problem solving. So rather than spelling out exactly what you should do, you take some data, you show examples of what you want to do, and the system kind of constructs a way, right? So it's really like sort of the I don't know if I want to call it sort of the anti-hype AI message is that it's a new toolbox for implicit problem solving, but it's part of the longer trend and larger trend of sort of software taking over businesses, software eating the world.
All right. Well, so many companies are seeking data science talent right now. Tony gave us some of this, but what advances are driving the continued interest, and how are businesses profiting from deploying new technologies? Is it the same for all companies? And if it isn't, then how do businesses go about identifying the wheat from the chaff in terms of what are the worthwhile applications for them in AI? We'll start with Emilio.
Yeah, sure. So what we're seeing is that although there's been a lot of innovations and tools, as we discussed in the previous answering the previous question, there has been some challenges in actually identifying what's valuable from a business perspective. So we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of advancements, but what is that is really driving interest from a business perspective is really results from a business standpoint. And so what is driving the the separation between what's good for business and what's not is really like the approach to AI. So like saying we see our clients that are successful are the ones that start with the use cases, for example, and the outcomes that they want to achieve. They don't start with the tool. They start with saying, I need to solve a personalization problem that everybody's been talking about, like the right message at the right time to the right person about the right product since the 80s, right? But there were not the right tools to do this. And so we couldn't handle like the large amount of data that we had to handle to solve this. And now the tools that we have discussed can allow us to do this. And so does this work? Does this work for this specific use case? And the answer is yes. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the technical part. So first is outcomes. Second thing is like the technical part, which is a key enabler, as we have just said. And the third part that we are seeing is the people part. It's not helpful, based on our experience, to have a fantastic technology and a fantastic AI algorithm if then this doesn't change how things are done at the company and it's not embedded in the processes and the ways of working. simply because that's what generates value at the end of the day, is this idea of leveraging these two tools to provide this personalization offers to clients, right? And so actually implementing it and have it in the market as a way of creating value for our customers. I'm just giving an example, and for our company. So I think that's what separates like what's interesting to companies versus not, is really generating the outcomes that they are looking for and solving problems that they've been challenged with for the past 20, 30 years.
Okay, thanks, Emilio. So focusing more on some of those challenges and potential pitfalls, what are the limitations and risks of new AI technologies in business applications? What obstacles really stand in the way of enjoying the major benefits from these technological advances, and how are companies overcoming them? Are there parties that are going to gain and lose in these new AI capacities? Anthony, what do you think?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, I think. I actually want to just double down on something Emilio said, which is to start with the use cases. And I want to point out that this is like this is a real risk, right? Meaning that people really do get sort of interested in the technology, and they try and look for applications of that technology, and that's a recipe for failure, right? And that's like, and in fact, when you see, you know, the studies by McKinsey about, you know, it's something like sorry, I don't have the exact number, but it's like 85% of AI projects fail. When you look at why they fail, this is like one of the key reasons. But I want to push slightly past use cases, right? So that's like, which is like the business problem, and point out that you need to also start with operations, right? Which is going back to, which is to say you have to have, you know, a digital representation of your workflow, of your decision process, right? And that key decision that you're making, right, that you're trying to influence, that's use case, needs to exist in a system that's amenable to building AI, right? And so that like you know, you have to start with these with the more like basic work, and one could even argue harder work of digitizing your business, of transforming yourself, you know, like I said, sort of in the first answer, essentially into a software business. And then once you have those decision workflows, right, you can start looking at how to apply AI. It's very tempting to approach this the other way around, to hire an AI team, and that AI team, you know, knows AI techniques, and then they go and they look for problems to apply their technique in your business, right? But this is just, it's doomed to failure for like a million reasons. Some of them having to do with AI. AI is very brittle. It's very sensitive to exactly how it's going to be used in terms of the performance. So like trying to sort of come in on top of something without understanding the problem is dangerous. That's kind of what I would see as like, in some sense, the biggest risk is approaching this backwards, right? From the AI technology. And in fact, you know, panels like this encourage the wrong point of view, because we're here talking about AI, right? Instead of, you know, talking about some business problem, or right, like we're encouraging people to be interested in the AI itself rather than in solving their problems. That said, here I am, you know, here we are. I don't want to like shut us down. No need to turn it off, but like we do need to keep focused on that operations first, business problem first mentality.
Okay, does anybody else have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I would add to what Anthony was doing. So first and foremost, obviously, I totally agree. I would add that this nuanced version of like what the operations, I think what Anthony is also talking about is like keeping the human in the loop and keeping the human perspective, and also having the human work with the AI, because we are very creative. We humans are very creative. We can, you know, make decisions and, you know, understand what's going to be best for our business. We do need machines to do calculations and operations very fast and very quickly and automate them and so on, but we cannot just delegate to them. And so it's important, this integration between the humans, we call it like a bionic integration between the humans and the AI or the technology in general, so that we can make better decisions and create more value for our business. We have done some research in our project. We've seen that our clients that or clients that have implemented or had implemented in the past just the technology or the AI had great results. Some of them a little less great. Some others had restructured their processes, but not a lot of automation and AI, and they had increasingly good results. But the combination of the two, the combination of the human aspect and the AI, what we saw was generating most value for the businesses we're working with.
Yeah, even just to add on to that, so one of the risks of AI is essentially automation without the human in the loop, right? And AI, so AI is a kind of automation, right? And like all automation, essentially, it requires like a codification of inputs and outputs, right? And so if there's a radical change in the nature of the inputs, the outputs sort of become disassociated with a reality, right? And so, like, for instance, we saw that during the first part of COVID, when you saw supply chains go completely bonkers, right? People's consumer habits had changed, but the processes for like ordering goods had not changed and delivering goods had not changed, right? These supply chains were kind of just running on automatic, and like then like nobody has toilet paper all of a sudden, right? And so the ability to, yes, automation is important and it can add efficiencies, but you also have to understand that it's going to add rigidity and brittleness to your processes. And so that human in the loop, understanding how the human sits in the system as essentially a protection for the changing world, right? For the we talk about creativity, but it's also just basic, like the world has changed, and so the human is going to have to get in there and adjust things, because the AI is not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, just on a optimistic note, there's been a lot of effort in recent AI in what's called imitation learning, to understand what the goals of to have AIs understand what are the goals of humans, not just what are they instructed to do, what processes can they automate, but what are the preferences, what are the risk attitudes, what are the goals of people, and then under radically changing conditions, when there's real uncertainty, real innovation, real disruption, as in the case of COVID, more flexible AI, and I should again emphasize this is recent work. It's not perhaps ready for prime time, but headed in that direction. The idea is, well, people's goals change more slowly. That they still want to have toilet paper, no matter what's happened to disrupt the world. If we understand the goals and how to bring them about through dynamic planning and intervention, we can have a smarter kind of AI that's a little less fragile, a little more insightful about what needs to be done. And Anthony, I think you had made the point earlier that understanding implicit goals, so observing behaviors and saying, what are people really trying to do here, is one path towards more socially graceful, smarter, flexible, less brittle AI. And are we there yet? No. Do we have something pretty substantial? Getting there. Did it exist 10 years ago? Not so much. Has it been deployed? Yes, in certain narrowly defined areas, such as shared control of semi-autonomous drone swarms with human guidance, where the drones adjust automatically to unexpected gusts of wind, for example. But they understand that the overall goal is to fly something from here to there. So I wanted to interject that note of optimism that folks are working on this problem and working productively on the problem of having a smarter and less brittle AI.
On this note of not putting the cart before the horse that we talked about sort of at the beginning of this question with Anthony, do you think that there's something that there are specific steps that businesses can take to advance themselves on the data and analytics sort of maturity spectrum? What role does data play in that? What role does business process play in that to avoid that big pitfall? Let's start with Anthony again.
Yeah. So just if we go back to this overarching, theme that I brought up at the beginning, which is that we're trying to avoid having software eat our business, right? Some other company with better process eat our business, right? And so what does that mean? Well, it means you need to become a digital business, right? So the way I like to think about that is in terms of digital twins. So digital twins is like a terminology that is frequently used to describe like large industrial equipment where you have, a bunch of sensors on the equipment and you have some software interface that allows you to monitor and potentially adjust exactly what is happening, with that equipment, maybe do predictive maintenance, things like that, right? But what we need to do, and what all businesses need to do, is consider building digital twins of the business, which is to say, make digital models, not just of their physical equipment, but of both their physical and, their business process and their sort of virtual decision-making processes, right? That's what we mean when we talk about becoming a software company or becoming a, digitalization, is this process of building in your IT system a digital copy of the business, and that allows you then to do reasoning, to apply AI, to as you build out different workflows in different parts of your business, you can apply AI and more advanced analytics to those pieces, right? And the goal, though, the goal is I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a big goal. But the goal is essentially to create that digital twin of your business so that you can apply digital optimization. And just like one, final comment on that is that you need to not just have observability. So this is where you're looking at a dashboard. What is my business doing? How am I making decisions? But there needs to be the ability to act, right? You have to have your objects in your business. You have to have relationships between these objects, and you have to have actions. And once you have all three of those pieces, and the actions is the trickiest part, then you could really start applying AI and analytics and, all these different techniques to make your business better.
Well, that really leads to a question about competition. So we'll start with Tony for the next question. Where does AI and ML offer the most compelling advantages, and where might it be a disadvantage? Are there risks of AI and ML related business being captured by the technology industry, even for companies that don't exist in that industry? And how can you avoid that?
Yeah, well, that's a great set of questions there. I think there's some useful rules of thumb. For example, AI is currently not great for a lot of customer interactions. If you have an upset customer on the phone, you probably don't want to turn them over to an AI system. On the bright side, many companies have found success in essentially increased automation of back office operations. So pretty humble, pretty invisible, almost embedded AI has had a huge impact and is having a huge impact. Not so different from just the impact of IT generally, but where I've seen dramatic successes, really transformational successes, is in applications of AI to narrowly defined use cases. My favorite example is using AI for telecommunications network planning and optimization over time, where there's a complicated kind of operations research problem to be solved. There's a lot of data. There are $100 billion stakes on the table, and all you need is smart enough tools to solve a narrowly defined problem. In cases like that, there's really a lot of horsepower. It's not, it's not as glamorous as Watson, sort of open world general purpose AI, but these deep, narrow applications have had some really sensational payoffs for companies that I've worked with. I'd say, and then I'll be quiet and invite others to talk. I'll say that the tension between innovation and imitation doesn't have a right answer here. It really depends on your company, your industry. There are parts of AI that have been commoditized. Again, I'll say a great deal of machine learning right now is off the shelf. There's healthy competition among vendors. What that means is vendors aren't taking most of the profits, but in fact, they're providing really useful software at competitive prices. So there is a move for things that are well understood to become commoditized, and their competition is among vendors for the business of major companies, and that's a pretty solid win for the companies. And then on the perhaps bleeding edge, there are companies and vendors that are seeking to make a profit from sustained innovation. They're saying, we have something new and valuable to you that either nobody else has or that isn't easily available elsewhere. And certain kinds of decision optimization fall in that camp. Causal artificial intelligence is there's been several companies started in the last 6 months that are getting $50 million VC investments before having huge payoffs to show. I think in that area, competition among companies to get a competitive advantage by deploying technology is a risky business for some of the reasons that we've all talked about, putting the cart before the horse and so forth. It's a business that can pay off big time for a while. So winning through sustained innovation is all about transience. And so I think better language models, better NLP applications, better decision optimization algorithms, those are all areas where innovation is currently working and commanding an extra profit margin. It's not yet in any of those areas. Well, some exceptions for NLP, but it's not yet the case that this is all mature and commoditized. We'll probably see that in the years ahead. We're not there yet. So those are some initial thoughts.
Yeah, if I may add, my interpretation of competition, right? Tony did a great job at talking about the competition among vendors and innovation and so on. Perhaps I can provide some perspective on like whether or not AI can be a competitive advantage for businesses, right? And so looking at competition of business that don't produce AI, but like that they have their own type of business, and how do they relate to AI? We're seeing two things in the market. One is there are businesses that believe that AI can provide them with a competitive advantage, and so they make the AI unique to them. So they leverage all these tools. But they definitely customize it a lot, and they ask for customizing not only the tools and the applications, but also like the processes that they have within their companies. And also they create teams that are almost like innovation labs that report directly to somebody at the C-level, could be the CEO, chief strategy officer, and so on. So they make AI as their way of winning in the market. And it has to be unique, and it cannot be off the shelves, because otherwise it's not a competitive advantage by definition, right? And that's something that we are seeing. So certain companies are making these large digital transformations, or whatever you want to call it, and make AI as part of something that is embedding their processes and becomes a competitive advantage. Then there are other companies, or maybe other functions in the same companies, that are more interested in saying, well, I need something to automate what I currently have, but I do understand that this is not going to be a differentiator for me. It's just going to be table stakes. And so probably a solution off the shelf in that case that is, calibrated but not necessarily customized, and doesn't change really the way things work at the business, is still very, very helpful and generates a lot of value for them and generates efficiencies and so on, but definitely not a competitive advantage. So this is the perspective that I wanted to share in terms of like how AI can change a business substantially, or change in terms of efficiencies, but still using just off-the-shelf solutions.
Okay, let's take a little turn and talk a little bit about social implications. So what are the implications of advances in AI and ML work on work, leisure, and the economy? How might technological progress affect worker productivity, wages, employment, international competitiveness? What can we do to aim for a good outcome for everybody, or at least for most? Emilio, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm gonna share a couple of thoughts here, and then I'll pass it to Anthony. I know he's an expert on the topic, so I want to leave enough time for him to share his thoughts. So I think this is obviously a very big question, and it's a multi-faceted one as well. So like there are social implications in AI that, for example, go back to what we call responsible AI. For example, making sure that models are not biased, and they don't learn just from a biased sample and therefore keep telling a biased answer. Just to give you an example, right? We recently worked with one of our clients who was looking at a retailer, was looking at their footprint from a store footprint. And they explicitly asked, I do understand I need to maximize my profit by opening and closing stores, but I want to make sure that the solution that you're going to tell me about is a solution that is that considers diversity goals, my diversity goals. So I don't want to open a store or close a store that's going to have an impact on workers or customers because it's open or closed in an area that is specifically diverse or not diverse enough. And so that was something that for us, I mean, we do have a specific team that focusing on responsible AI. We brought them into the mix because it was a specific requirement of the client, and that needs to be accounted for, right? So you cannot just build a model that doesn't account for that. You have to have a solution that is unbiased and, make sure that there are the right jobs in the right place. The other thing that we are seeing is also application of AI to social impact, but also environment. I think that's a big new trend that is coming up, and we're seeing more and more people applying these techniques to, for example, track the CO2 emissions of their company, or even pushing to the extra to the edge. It's like tracking how much their algorithms are emitting in terms of carbon footprint of running algorithms that might be very, very power intensive. So there is a lot to be explored here. I'll stop here, but I'll let Anthony share his thoughts.
Thanks. Everything Emilio said is absolutely correct. I think one of the, just as I tend to do, is to take kind of the opposite perspective here, which is like, what problems aren't we solving? What's not changing with the application of AI? One thing, is that so there was a time when people start using AI, and this goes back, many decades, let's say even to, using linear regression, and you look at like bias in like loans, right? So this is a classic thing around redlining and who gets a loan and who doesn't, and the models kind of reinforcing existing societal bias, right? There was sort of, I think, a period of time when we thought we could maybe optimize away these problems. So like Emilio said, if you're concerned about being biased in some way, and you just you use your sort of mathematical techniques to make sure you're not biased. The problem, the problem here is that, and then you could just rely on technology, right? Like this would be the techno optimist. Like we can solve our problems, with race and homophobia and all these things with AI. The problem is that though there's lots of ways of being biased, and you could show that you can't be sort of unbiased in all the ways at once, right? So this is the most technical I'll get in this talk, but there's an impossibility theorem that says, mathematically it's impossible to be unbiased in all these ways at once. And what that tells us is that AI isn't going to solve these hard social problems, right? It's not that we give up on being unbiased, but that the tricky question is deciding as a society, what are the ways, what are our values? How do we enforce justice, right? These are like deep societal questions that technology is not going to solve for us, and AI is not going to solve for us. And maybe there was a brief moment in time when we thought it would, but it's not, right? That said, we do get a lot from AI systems that in some sense is a little ancillary to the AI system, right? It's the digitization process, which is that we get observability, right? We can quantify now in a way that we couldn't before, and more society, as we turn our systems into digital systems, right? We can observe how are we biased, and then we can have a discussion. Is this an okay way? Way before it was sort of an abstract discussion where you suspect something or you feel something. Now we can have much more concrete discussions about exactly the way in which we're biased, and we can make decisions about the right way to solve those problems, and then we can enforce those decisions. But that it doesn't come for free as part of AI, right? It's something that you have to, right? It's still hard. It's a social problem, right? It's not a mathematical problem. And that's kind of, I think, important to keep in mind when we talk about social implications. I'm going to pivot to something completely different. If people don't mind for a second, which is that I think the technology has been very disruptive to society in a lot of ways, right? Like, because technology and AI in particular allows the scaling up of certain kinds of operations and interactions, right? The spreading of disinformation, right? With bots, you can sort of hack algorithms to make sure that some opinion rises to the top, right? And this kind of ability to turn, to quote someone, Miles Brundage, he works at OpenAI, he's the head of policy. He describes it as turning compute power into political power. I think this is something that AI is starting to play a role in, and will play in the future a larger role in. Is this, especially like with the advances in language models and images and video manipulation, is this like compute to political power. And we have to be very careful about that, because compute, is hard to monitor. It's hard to know who is using the compute to do what. And as a society, we really need to think about how these social systems are used, how they're monitored, and the effect they're having on us. So I'll just leave with those words. Sorry, it's a little down at the end there. My apologies.
Well, that actually really anticipated my next and final question, which gets at, what are the predictable trends in AI and ML right now? What is the future likely to hold for business deployment of these technologies? And are there any areas of wholesale societal risk that we should work to avoid? You mentioned one, certainly with the conversion of compute power to political power, but are there any others? Let's continue with you, Anthony.
Yeah. Actually, can we not continue with me? I need to gather my thoughts for a second.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, maybe I can start with like, to me, the future is bright, right? So the future of AI is something that is probably going to be bright. There are challenges that have to be solved, and there are going to be questions going to be raised by, you know, how we use AI and so on. But I think there are great opportunities to enhance the way we work with machines and how machines help us work better and generate more value. I can give a few examples of trends that I see, like that might actually be quite disruptive in the future. And they are, let's say, if we look at the data quantity spectrum and algorithmic power, I think there are two interesting trends. There is like the quantum computing on one side, which is like, you know, do more faster and so on. But I also think that there is an interesting trend in solving problems that don't have a lot of data. So there is this idea of like, well, can I apply these techniques when I don't have a lot of data? And what is the best way of solving for that? Is it generating synthetic data? So AI generating data just to almost actually really self-learn, right? Based on a few examples, generating more so that it can then learn. Or there are maybe statistical techniques like Bayes and so on that's going to come and help us with that. And this is not just necessarily like a theoretical question. There are very, very important questions. Like, for example, I'm thinking marketing mix modeling, where you don't have a lot of data. You have an investment for, you know, 3 years of investment in a marketing channel. It is basically a weekly tracking, and you have 300 data points, right? So it's not that you have 150 data points. So it's not that you have a lot of data, but it's a very, very important challenge to solve for companies, because there are really millions, if not billions of dollars for certain companies invested in advertisement every year. So I think these are two of the trends that come to mind. I think Tony is going to tell us about causal AI. I'm a huge fan. I think it's going to be probably one of the most disruptive topics in the next 5 years that's going to come up on the algorithmic side, or algorithmic and approach side to machine learning. These are the things that I believe we should keep an eye on for the future.
Yeah, and well, Emilio, you've done such a beautiful job there. Let me just add a couple of footnotes. On the causal AI side, I think part of the issue of social responsibility has to do with anticipating the likely consequences of AI actions. This again gets back to the idea that if part of what you're doing recognizes human goals, human constraints, concerns such as concerns about fairness and bias, a good causal network, a good causally aware AI will take those goals and constraints into account, and thus part of the path towards more responsible, more trustworthy, more socially friendly AI is indeed through causal AI, where the idea is we take actions in order to make preferred outcomes and achieving goals more likely. But I also wanted to comment. I was Anthony, very, very pleased that you mentioned the impossibility theorems, and I would put a slightly different spin on this. So this became an issue. AI systems and statistical systems, analytic systems have been used for decades to help advise court systems about things like which prisoners should be paroled, when is the societal risk predicted to be acceptable, and this is an area where equity, fairness, and bias concerns are really prominent. And part of what AI has done, or the study of AI has done, is to sharpen the questions that we're asking and to sharpen our understanding of what we mean or what we don't mean when we talk about fairness and bias. So a standard impossibility theorem in that domain is that if you want well-calibrated risk predictions, when a risk score says, on a scale from 1 to 10, if a certain prisoner is given an 8, it should mean the same thing regardless of that prisoner's race or other characteristics. The score should mean the same thing for everyone, and it should be an accurate predictor. If we hold that principle of a well-calibrated, accurate system, and simultaneously hold fairness principles that says, and let's not have some races or groups blessed with smaller error rates than others. We want this to be a really fair system. It turns out that mathematically those requirements of accuracy and equal error rates are in general inconsistent with each other. You can have one or you can have the other. You can't have both. That insight, that understanding, which is in a sense nothing to do with AI, it does have something to do with mathematics, sheds a kind of clarity and shines a kind of light on the challenge of articulating what it is that we want our AI systems to do that didn't exist before people started applying the rigor of AI and software implementable solutions to this societal problem. I think there will be increasingly areas of, I'm inclined to say, social philosophy, where our concepts about what we want are challenged and ultimately made stronger and clearer once we get down to the level of saying, so how would we want an AI to implement what it is that we say we want? What do we really mean here? So that development has been intellectually very interesting and perhaps important. Sometimes we want things that are literally impossible, mathematically impossible. It's good to be aware of that. I'll leave with one concluding thought on societal implications. Lots of people have worried about technological unemployment as a consequence of increased AI and robotics. I'll say that I think, although this is a complicated and difficult topic, I think there's no signs that that's actually likely to happen. I think that so far, the trajectory has been that increasing use of AI has tended to lead to increased productivity and to higher wages, higher value. I would say, without understanding the causal mechanisms, we perhaps can't confidently forecast the future. But so far, fears that AI would displace human workers and that we would all be unemployed, I don't see any signs of that coming true. Quite the reverse. I think, if anything, AI is helping to increase the productivity of workers and ultimately their wages and job quality, automating the stuff that's boring and having humans spend more time on what humans should be spending time on. So again, I tend to have a fairly optimistic view, but part of it, I think, is based on the reality of what's happened so far. So just a few observations there.
All right, thank you. Well, in the interest of time, we'll move to questions. It's been a great discussion so far. The floor is open for questions from the audience at this point, and we have one. I believe this was originally directed to Emilio. Somebody says, wondering about examples within your company or clients that had particularly great results or ROIs with AI ML.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, I cannot mention names unless they are public. But I will tell you about. So there are several examples. One that is not really popular because it's well known is, our personalization efforts at Starbucks, for example. Every time you order or you order a coffee, you get recommendations on your app. That's us. Basically, we build it with them. And that generated so much ROI for them. So that's just one of the examples that I can share because it's completely public that we work together. We actually had a joint venture at some point. But what I wanted to say is that, and there is more, and it's across several industries. All the industries you can think about, from fast fashion to mining to CPG to distributors, airlines. So what I want to say is that it's not that AI can be helpful only in a specific industry. It can be helpful across the board. But it has to be implemented to generate ROI. It has to be implemented. We see the constant of success along those lines of like being strategic, creating a competitive advantage, starting with use cases, prototyping, then assessing the value and then scaling rather than saying, okay, I need this huge platform. Well, not yet. First, make sure that it works, right? And then definitely the human component, like making sure that AI becomes part of how people not only creates innovation in the company, but then actually does their everyday job, leveraging these resources and deploying recommendations, decisions, and using these tools as they deliver value to their customers. And I'm talking about customers, but like this is true for any organization. We have also worked with a lot of like nonprofit, and they've seen obviously returns, not measured necessarily in ROI for that perspective, but returns in efficiencies, effectiveness in their KPIs by leveraging AI. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. The best example I've ever seen is one I alluded to a few minutes ago. In telecom, AI systems for planning and optimizing networks over time, basically trying to carry the same amount of traffic with the same performance guarantees at a greatly reduced cost by decision optimization. That is a spectacular area of real payoffs for telecom carriers and network operators, it's a solid win. I'll say the line between operations research and AI gets blurred. I mean, there's very narrow, very technical areas, but there is real huge demonstrated value also in those narrow niches.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said so far. One area that we're seeing a lot of value coming from is around decision optimization, and in particular, AI enabling a kind of counterfactual reasoning, right? So it's not about making AI making a prediction, but essentially feeding into a simulation of some process or some system, and then allowing a human to say, well, what happens if we do this or if we do that? Like, and then using that to make better decisions, whether it's like, better routing for packages or like airline swaps where there's a mechanical problem with one plane and you need to, figure out how that's going to affect your network and your commitments to your customers. So this kind of decision optimization, counterfactual reasoning is an area we're seeing a lot of value. It's not a a specific use case. It's sort of a general capability, but I think that there's a lot, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for the question, and thanks for the great examples to the panelists and for all of the good discussion. We'll hand it back over to Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan, for your support and the expert job of facilitating today. Emilio, Anthony, thank you. We're so fortunate to have you. And Tony, we're so fortunate to have you on our faculty. It's been super stimulating. Audience, thanks for joining us. Please look for future business insights starting up in the next academic year. And we'll hope to see you then. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.